Hello, my name is Hudson Parks, and today I will be recording a podcast on growing mental health issues across the world. What inspired me to make this podcast was actually a visit to the art museum where a certain piece of art caught my attention. This was More Trouble by Ralph Fletcher Seymour. It's an etching where it shows a man leaning against a tree and something appears to be wrong with his shoe. And the background is very gloomy, and as the title suggests, he's run into more trouble with his shoe and, of course, what's ever going on in the background. This art sort of reminded me of people with mental health issues and how they can be left all alone to tackle their problems. And it can seem like you're running into more trouble and you don't have a way to escape. So I have some interesting statistics listed here. Per the National Institute of Mental Health, it is estimated that 23.1% of the US population is living with a mental illness as of 2022. And young adults aged 18 to 25 had the highest prevalence of mental illness, with 36.2% of people, compared to 26 to 49-year-olds with 29.4% of people, and 50-plus-year-olds with 13.9%. Another interesting statistic from the National Alliance on Mental Illness: unfortunately, suicide is the second leading cause of death among children ages 10 to 14. And from Mental Health America, 46% of Americans will meet the criteria for a diagnosable mental health condition. Why is this a growing problem, you might ask? The COVID-19 pandemic is certainly a huge cause of the recent jump in mental health issues. Part of this was because of isolation and loneliness. Lockdowns, social distancing, and quarantines meant millions of people were suddenly cut off from friends, family, and normal routines. And humans need connection. That sudden forced isolation led to spikes in anxiety, depression, and feelings of loneliness, especially for people that are younger and older adults. Another issue of this was fear and uncertainty during the pandemic. Nobody really had a lot of information about the virus, how long it was going to last. We just didn't know what to expect. People were in a constant state of fear. Some were losing their jobs. They were worried about the future. They were worried about the health of their family and themselves. And this sort of triggered a lot of anxiety and stress for people. And another issue that the pandemic caused is millions of deaths globally. So people were grieving their loved ones, grieving the loss of a normal life. They're missing out on milestones like their children's birthdays, or grieving about losing their jobs and missing out on some experiences. And grief can definitely have a very negative impact on your mental health. Economic issues were another big cause of stress during the pandemic. With housing instability, people losing their jobs, financial insecurity, that's one way for stress to just take over. And another issue of the pandemic was the healthcare system was stretched very thin, and it was overwhelming, and people didn't have access to therapy or psychiatric care when they needed it the most, because offices were closed, places were overbooked, or they couldn't afford it due to their economic issues. The pandemic also caused a rise in substance use and domestic violence. And data shows that increases in alcohol and drug use during the pandemic because people were using it as a way to cope with their stress and isolation. And domestic violence also spiked as some people were trapped in unsafe situations and didn't have much options to get help. Another huge cause of growing mental health issues in this century is the rise of social media. People are now constantly comparing themselves to highlight reels of other people's lives, perfect bodies, vacations, success stories, anything to make people feel like they're not good enough. This leads to lower self-esteem, anxiety, and depression. Another issue that social media causes is cyberbullying and harassment. And online bullying is real, and it's often more relentless and anonymous than in-person bullying. Victims of cyberbullying are at a higher risk for depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. Another issue is the fear of missing out. Seeing other people post about parties, events, or their achievements can make people feel excluded or that they're falling behind, making them feel lonely and dissatisfied. And another issue with this is widespread misinformation, and this can cause people to be scared or overwhelmed. There are plenty of steps that need to be taken in order to fix this mental health illness problem in America and the world. And the CDC has outlined some of them into a 5-pillar plan. These pillars are collecting and using data, promoting well-being and preventing mental distress, educate and informing people about mental health and public health, strengthen mental health systems and support providers, engage and empower partners and communities to improve mental health. These pillars should strengthen mental health research and awareness. Think Global Health has outlined some steps that I believe could have a serious impact on this issue. Experts suggest that a long-term commitment to mobilizing greater capital toward mental health, making mental health reform a political priority, and streamlining the data collection process will drastically help. That is it for my episode today. Mental health is something that is so often overlooked, and it is nothing to ignore. It is important to know that you are never alone, and there are options for treatment that should be looked into. We can only hope that over the next few years we see significant progress made into this major problem. Thank you.